So first of all, I'm gonna start sharing, and so this is the magazine I run, Mushroom, the Journal of Wild Mushrooming. It's mushroomthejournal.com. You should, of course, all subscribe. And the mushroom, well, one of the mushrooms of the moment is hen of the woods, Griffula frondosa. It looks kind of feathery and fluffy, even though it's, got the texture of a cauliflower or whatnot. And it's actually a very easy mushroom as far as lookalikes are concerned, because most of the lookalikes are actually summer mushrooms, whereas this just comes out in the fall once it starts getting more chilly. And a couple other things which I'll mention. So this is one of the main lookalikes. This is Bonderzevia berkeleyi. Oh, and the other thing about the the lookalikes is they're also edible. So, you're not going to die if you mistake it for one of these. And berkeleyi is pretty distinct because it's not just big, it has these huge individual fronds, that sort of wrap all the way around the mushroom a lot of the time. So that renders it very distinctive. It's a summer mushroom, as you can see by the nice green grass around these things. Biologically, it's a lactarius that has gone bad and started attacking trees instead of symbiosising with them. And so it'll grow at the base of trees, but it's not helping them, it's actually eating their flesh. And one of the weird things about it is it'll come up like these little sort of deformed fingers. And at this stage, you can detect its lactarius heritage very easily because if you cut it, it'll give milk the way a regular milky cap will. And I should mention the site that I'm using for this discussion here is the Messiah.edu site by Gary Emberger. Longtime subscriber, good guy, and he did a really excellent job here of mushrooms that grow on wood. So, and it's also kind of fun for me personally that you can Google Messiah and the name of mushroom and it'll bring you to Gary's site. So it's easy to remember even if you don't remember anything else about the site. And berkeleyi, it starts off sort of having regular pores on the underside, even though they're kind of big. But they fairly quickly break up into this very irregular maze-like undersurface that is also very distinctive. So all in all, it's this big terrestrial polypore with these big round fronds that wrap all the way around. And, and I'll get to its edibility in a moment, but the other one is Miropolis, the blackening polypore. And this looks a bit more like a hen, especially when it's started to turn dark like this. The fronds, when it's mature, are still a little bigger than the hen. Here they are in the process of turning black, and they'll age black, so that something like this one on the right here with the pink background, they'll just look like this when they're older, just from aging. And this one also, he doesn't have a shot of the underside, but if you're confused between this and a hen, this one has really, really tiny pores. So whereas hens are, I would just call it normal size, but they're, they're big enough to see fairly easily. Not that you can see them on Zoom because screen sharing, but they are big enough to see. And I wanted to say also that these two lookalikes, the Miropolis, the Berkeleyi, they're also edible, but especially when they get big enough to be confused with a hen, they are really ungodly tough. And I have a friend in Southern Illinois who enthusiastically gathers Miropolis, and I said, "How the hell do you prepare it?" And he said, "I just boil it forever." And that's kind of what you need to do for these other two. And that's, I think this is why you read in a lot of the books that Hen of the Woods is extremely tough and needs long, slow cooking, which it doesn't. Okay, I really think they're just getting that because of confusion with these other mushrooms. And I've been on forums with the Illinois Club and said things. The other thing about Miropolis is that it tastes like liver, and it's kind of a good, calf's liver kind of thing, especially if you like that. And I don't particularly, but I've gotten this when it was really young and tiny, and it was soft and it was good in a meaty kind of way. But I was on a forum with Illinois Club people, and I said, if you've eaten a hen and it tasted like liver, you have eaten Miropolis. And one guy said, "Oh yeah, that's what's been happening." Okay. But Grifola pretty much, as far as I've found, it just has the texture of a normal, like one of the store-bought mushrooms. So I appreciate Vicky telling us about the recipe, just, simmering it in soup for a while. And I've just had my best results sauteing it like most mushrooms. And, it breaks down the hardness, the toughness, what that's there a bit, the crunchiness, and it becomes a nice soft mushroom and tastes really good. And at that point, that's the point at which I would put it in soup, or you put it on steak, or you put it on whatever you're going to put it on. And I just also wanted to mention, because I got a query at one of my earlier talks, sometimes you find them and they're white, like this one up here. And that happens when they don't get enough sunlight. Mushrooms and animals are sort of on one side of the super kingdom tree, and plants and chromista, brown algae, seaweed, and Phytophthora are on the other side. And one of the many biochemical similarities that we share with fungi is that when you put them in the sun, they tan. That is, they turn brown because they produce melanin. And they also produce vitamin D in the sunlight, the way we do. So if you want your mushroom to have more vitamin D, you can leave it in the window for an afternoon or two. But also, if these don't get sunlight when they're coming up, they won't turn brown. And I think I've not only found white ones, but twice I believe I've found ones that were sort of growing half in and half out of a hollow log, and the side that got light was brown, and the side that was inside the log was white. So just so that you know what's going on there, it's just a sign of our family that they're doing this. So that's the mushrooms. That's Grifola. And I'm going to move on now and talk about honey mushrooms. And then I'm going to quiz Luke on what we've covered, and we're going to have fun with that. So y'all have had a bunch of, there we go, honey mushrooms coming up over the past few weeks. And I wanted to start off with the official honey mushroom. So they're all in the genus Armillaria now. I won't go into why. And actually, I think the ringless now has its own genus. Let's see, is this? So this is the flagship species, Melia, which means honey. And it's got this nice yellow color on top. It has a nice substantial ring. There are these, it's got a browner stalk, and there are these white flakes on the stalk, and it'll come out in these big clusters on wood. And here we are seeing them from the bottom. You can see the, they'll come out from the wood and sort of curve up like this. It's kind of pretty. I'm sort of making hand gestures to show you the curve, but you can't see my hand gestures because I'm sharing my screen. Again, the dark stem with the white fibers here and there, and they've got a ring that's, it's not tough, and it's kind of cottony, but it is also kind of thick, as you can see, and it's sort of, the ring tissue is sort of coming into it from the top and the bottom there. And again, they're fairly big. Here's a cluster coming up from buried wood. Same light, yellow, light brown color, same stem with the white fibrils, little ring. And this is sort of the stage at which many people like to eat them when they're still very small on top. They get this big stem for a while with the little cap. And some people also like to take the stem and peel it because it's got a hard, brittle sort of rind on it, and then you end up with this white fibrous pith that some people like to fry up and eat. And I have heard that is good, but I have not tried it yet. And here they are again, another cluster coming up from the ground. They've got some dark fibers in the middle of the cap sometimes. Some of them don't, even though this is the same cluster. And just, added data on how they look. Here they are getting older. They're darker in the center, getting, more wrinkled and stuff. We still got young ones on the bottom here. And you may not want to eat them at this point. Some people are very picky because you get these, huge clusters of them, and you don't have to eat everything. And finally, when they get older, they get a bit floppy, the color fades. I don't think this is quite as brown as the picture is making it. This is an old photo. But they do get old and floppy, and you probably don't want to eat them at this point, and they may in fact be buggy. So, and like I said, they can get pretty big. So they're the biggest of the kinds that we get around here. And this, on the other hand, so Melia, this is Gallica, and I think it's also called bulbosa at this point. And when I first moved to Illinois, I didn't know what this was because I was used to the Melia from back east. You can see it's kind of sticky on top at first. There are quite a few of these black hairs in the center of the cap. sort of the same sort of ring, but it's much smaller. I'm not sure how much you can see, but it's quite yellow at the base a lot of the time. That's why I put that there. And they're often growing under oak, like Melia, like all of them actually. But this one doesn't come out in the big clusters. Well, here it is. Again, this is sort of a cluster. The ring is a lot flimsier and more cobwebby. And like I said, sticky fibrils in the middle of the cap, but that ring is really different. Again, are you hearing me now? It's okay. We've, you know, you can get it very fibrillose like this, these like pointy tufts of these black hairs. And, you know, this is when it's just coming up. And again, a lot of people like them best at this stage. And as you can sort of tell, they don't always, they're not in these thick clusters typically, like Melia. They form these troops across the forest floor. And while Melia is usually digesting some tree, be it a dead or a living tree, Gallica seems to eat the leaf litter on the forest floor, and this is the species of the humongous fungus that you've probably heard about at some point. The original humongous fungus that covered a few acres up in Michigan, and at that point was the world's largest and oldest known living organism. That was Gallica, and it just, you know, was trooping across the forest floor and kept going and going and going. And since then, they found a couple of other individuals out in Oregon that are even bigger. But, you know, as far as IDing it and, you know, knowing what you can gather to eat or not, this is, you know, an identifying feature for this mushroom. And again, if you look at the size of the leaves, this is again a much smaller mushroom than Melia. So here they are side by side. You know, when I first got my mushroom books, the Audubon guide just says, this is a species complex. And they all kind of look alike, but they're a little bit different, and we'll figure it all out eventually. And as Gary also used to say, unfortunately, you know, as long as the guide is still selling, and it is, they're never going to change that. But the Chicago Club, when I came here, was so used to finding Gallica on the right. They first of all didn't understand why I couldn't recognize it, because honeys are just this standard mushroom. And then when we started finding Melia out here, they were like, what is that? You know, what's going on here? And people were, you know, once we got other different honey mushroom, they started saying, how could anyone ever think these two are the same thing? And, you know, that's what happens. And a lot, you know, every once in a while, some person or other will get nostalgic or for the good old days when there were, you know, everyone sort of knew what they were. And when you go back, especially to the 19th century, you find that a lot of times they had absolutely no idea what was going on. And I have a lovely field guide picture of Amanita phalloides labeled Amanita citrina from the 1880s, you know, and it was a popular field guide in Germany at the time. So yeah, we are actually getting better at all of this, and making these distinctions is a big part of why. So with that, I'm going to move on to the third species of honey mushroom that we commonly find, and that's the ringless one. And this is even smaller. It looks kind of the same as the other two. Well, it looks more like Gallica than Melia because it's brown, or it doesn't have that yellow, um, which makes it easier to, which makes it very simple to identify. And it grows in these dense clusters. If it's coming up from buried wood, it'll look like it's terrestrial, but there's wood under there. And it has a lot of those little tufts on the cap, like we were seeing in the other mushrooms, but more of the cap is covered by them. And again, they're, look at the grass here. They're really small. And again, a lot of people, that's when they like them. And this is a photo from a week or two ago at Rockefeller Center by Sidney Salenga that he posted on Facebook. And it's tabessins, it's the ringless honey. And you can see, this is just very typical, as well as being very impressive, just these immense clusters of tiny mushrooms without rings.
Not hearing you right now, Leon. You still with us? All right, everyone, just stand by, and I will try to get Leon back on the online there.
Okay, here I am. Sorry about that. Let's get back to, yes. So, Gallica, Gallica troops along the ground. It's eating the leaf litter. Tabessins, the ringless honey, is an aggressive parasite, and it kills trees very quickly. I believe it was, yeah, okay. We'll save that for another talk. But yeah, so this tree is not long for this world, unfortunately. And let's see if I have more. Oh, this was. This probably should be earlier. Gallica is usually the honey mushroom that is attacked by the aborted Entaloma. So if you're going to be a parasite, going after the world's largest living organism is a good bet. And that's why you can walk into a clearing in the forest and see hundreds of these Armillaria nuggets there. And there's this little white mushroom in the middle is the Enteloma in its, actual mushroom form. The nuggets are honey mushroom mushrooms that sort of started to come up but have been taken over by the Enteloma. And if you want to go into this a little more, I can do that later. But that's, oh, and here's, okay, I decided to do that now. This is the top of that Enteloma. It has this dull metallic gray color. And underneath it has these subdecurrent gills. There's just a little tooth of gill going down the stem, just a little bit. And they're the only Enteloma that does this. So between the cap color and the gills they're starting to turn pink from the spores. When they're young, it'll just be all white like this one here, but you can sort of see already the gills are going down the stem just a little tiny bit. And I was mentioning in our little chat before the presentation, I actually like the taste of these a lot better than the nuggets. Some people like the nuggets. I like the Enteloma mushrooms. I also don't care for honey mushrooms themselves terribly much. But, you know, this means that when I go on a hunt with friends, like, I just give them the honey mushrooms and the nuggets, and they give me their Entelomas. So we all go home happy. And this is just a little demonstration of the difference between the aborted Enteloma and the sort of Enteloma you're most likely to mistake it for. And those are mostly summer mushrooms also, but you can find them in the fall. So at the left, you have the aborted Enteloma. It's got this dull cap, this matte finish, as we say. It's a little bit rough. And the gills going down the stem a little bit. On the left here, these aren't free gills, by the way. It's old and the gills have popped away from the stem as the mushrooms dried out. But on the right, you find a more typical Enteloma. So the cap is shiny and smooth, and the gills are attached sort of straight on at right angles to the cap, to the stem. And that will help you tell them apart. And if you're worried about it, be careful and ask someone, or don't eat them. So the other, another non honey lookalike are the Gallerinas, which are these deadly Gallerinas. And one of the ways to tell them apart right immediately is just from their size. They're usually about the size of a dime, as you can see from the texture of the wood here and the moss that's growing here. And they almost always come out on fairly large logs with moss on them. They don't come out on trees. You usually don't find them on the ground. You can find a similar mushroom called tuberia on the ground that is, again, tiny and brown spored, but generally not Gallerinas. The Gallerina is also a brown spored mushroom. You can see here on the lower part of this cap here, the gills are starting to turn brown from the spores, and there is this brighter brown spore deposit on the stem and a little bit up here. They have a ring also, and the ring can collect spores and turn brown from that. And as you can see, the gills have turned a uniform brown here in these specimens that are quite mature, even though they're very small and they're still curled up. And the cap always, yeah, there's a better ring. The cap usually just reminds me of caramel, the way it looks. The Gallica, Armillaria gallica, can have a sticky cap, but they don't really look, somehow these things just look like caramel to me when I find them. And again, they have a very clear and small ring. Again, they're very tiny. It's not the same kind of a ring as that thick cottony or cobwebby ring in the honey mushrooms. And again, you can see it's on a log with moss, and you can see from the moss that these are very tiny mushrooms. Here are some unusually huge ones. And you can see something else that happens a lot when they get older is they're what we call hygrophonus, which means that the cap tissue changes its transparency as it dries out, and this changes its apparent color. So you can see it's turning browner at the edges, and some of these have a different color in the middle also, because the halfway part of the mushroom is a different has a different water content than the center, and this is something that they do all the time. This just looks very, very caramelly to me, and this is something I always notice in these mushrooms. So again, more comparison. We have Melia on the left. It's often quite yellow. It has a fairly substantial ring. It's got this darker stem with the white tufts on it. In the middle, we have Gallica with the sticky cap and the dark hairs in the middle. It's got a ring that is much more cobwebby. If you get it young, you can catch it while it's still sort of stretched out in a cobwebby way between the stem and the edge of the cap. But if you find it completely expanded like here, there's just going to be a little of it left, and it's going to be very soft and fragile. Ringless honeys on the top right, even smaller, no ring, lots of fibrils all over the place, and these really dense, large clusters of very small mushrooms. And then lower right, the Gallerina, which is even smaller and comes out on these moss-covered logs. So now I'm going to ask Luke to unmute, which maybe he is already, but so we're going to take Luke through some photos, and he's going to tell us what the mushroom is and why. Are you ready, Luke?
I'm ready.
Okay, so here we go. What do these look like to you?
Thanks, Anthony. Let's see. Looking at Anthony, he's saying in the chat to grill me. All right, so we are looking here at, well, it's definitely an Armillaria. It's not one of the Gallerinas. I don't know. I see a lot of fibrils on the top, and they are, I don't know, they're kind of clustered, but they're on the ground. So I'm going to go with Gallica.
Yeah, that's quite reasonable. It could be Gallica. It could be Tebessins with so much fibrils on the cap. But, this is one of those things where we'd have to turn it over and look. And, once we did that, the distinction would be clear because Tebessins doesn't have a ring. And these are small enough, if they were Gallica, that they would still have that cottony web stretched out between the stalk and the edge of the cap. Okay. So next picture. What about these?
So do we know on the last one? I'm just curious because
I think these, let's see. It says Gallica.
Okay.
So you were right.
Okay. So these guys are clustered, and they definitely have a ring on them. The ring's not even separated yet. So I'm going to go with Malay on these.
That is correct. Yeah, and they're also a bit, these are dark brown in the center, but they're also sort of getting yellow around the edges, so they're probably going to get yellower. But yeah, these are Melia, and they're actually, coming out from that tree there instead of from the ground. Did someone else want to say something here?
Yeah, I had a question, Andrea. I was wondering how you can tell there's a ring if the ring hasn't separated yet.
Because it's covering the gills. So the ring on mushrooms starts out as a membrane that covers the gills, and then as the stalk expands, it breaks free from that membrane, and that membrane is left as a ring on the stalk.
Is that the same as a veil?
It's a partial veil, yeah. Yeah.
Thanks.
And
Can we have Luke identify the other two mushrooms in this image?
what?
Can we have Luke try to identify the other two hidden mushrooms in this image?
Oh, you guys are on me. Okay, it looks like there's a stereum behind it, immediately behind it, right? I imagine it's a stereum. I can't really see the bottom that well, but the top of it looks like that. And then, are you looking at the mushroom that's in the upper left?
So,
I'm going to take a wild guess and say that's a Rusula back there.
yeah, probably an old Russula. Since Andrea asked the question, I'm just going to jump away from this for a second and go to the website. Can I get my menus here? Okay, mushroom identification. We have an identification course here which is in progress, but it does have a page for partial veils. So you start off with the veil covering the gills, and then as the cap expands, it gets left. Oh, look at that. There's an Armillaria gallica, showing the cobwebby ring here. The cobwebby veil that gets left behind as a ring. And you see also the little wisps of the ring hanging from the edge of the cap. Now, this kind of ring that's sort of stiff and it hangs down, this is another very thin partial veil that's just going to get left as a couple of wisps on the stem. And, you know, sometimes that veil mostly gets left hanging on the edge of the cap. Now, these veils actually have different names, and at one point people were more picky about calling them by these special names. So this very fragile cobwebby thing is called a Cortina, and it gives its name to the genus Cortinarius, which all have this kind of veil. As you can see, they're not the only mushrooms that have this kind of veil, but all of Cortinarius do have this veil, and so they're named for it. And this sort of very fragile thing that's not quite a Cortina, this could probably be called a Cortina, but that doesn't really have a name for itself. But you have some mushrooms that have a glutinous veil. This is the genus Limacella, which is basically an amanita, as you might have guessed from looking at it, that just happens to have a veil that is made of, you know, slime instead of fibers. And the thing is, this sturdy membranous veil that hangs down is called a annulus. And you may have seen books that just call the ring an annulus, period. And that's not a terribly good thing to do, because, so here's another very sturdy annulus, but, and some of them, everything is just very powdery and shaggy, so you end up with messes of shaggy stuff on the stem. But, okay, when you have sort of the skin of the stalk that just sort of attaches to the edge of the cap, and as the cap expands, it's just sort of pulling the skin of the cap away from the stem. That is called an armilla, and that is what honey mushrooms are named for. They're called Armillaria because they have an armilla instead of an annulus. And originally, here's a shot that makes it clearer what's going on. So there's this, you know, orange skin to the cap, to the stem, and, you know, this just sort of expands and covers the gills originally, and then, you know, the cap expands and that stalk skin gets snapped away from the cap. And so you see the specimen on the left here. So the upper stalk is white because it doesn't have any more of that special skin on it. And that skin that was attached to the cap gets left on the stalk as an armilla. And so this is actually a different kind of ring, and it's what Armillaria is named for. And, so it's sort of relevant to what we were talking about, so I thought I'd take a break and bring us here. And here's also what I was saying about with the Gallerina. This is a Cortinarius. It has that cobwebby partial veil, and these wisps get the brown spores on them, and they get hung on the stalk, not as any kind of ring, but you can see the wisps, and they're brown because they've got brown spores deposited on them. And if you were looking at any other place on this Cortinarius, you wouldn't know right away that it has brown spores, but somehow the Cortina, the veil, is very good at picking them up and showing us that this is a brown spored mushroom. So this happens on Gallerina too. So if you find a little tiny honey mushroom with a ring that's brown on it, then you got to get very suspicious and think, okay, is this a ring that's been spore printed by brown spores? So let me just see what else is here. Yeah, so also shreds on the edge of the cap. Okay, let's go back to our interaction with Luke here. So what is it? You're 2 for 2 here? Is this it? Yeah. All right. So what do we have here? And why?
Well, so they're pretty yellow on top, and they're pretty thickly clustered coming right out of the wood. I can't tell whether these have rings or not, but I suspect that they do have rings, and I'm going to call that Malea.
You are correct. And yeah, that's the way to go about it. This is something that you can check by turning them over, and you're enough in the ballpark to be able to figure out from other clues if you need to. Okay, let's go on. Okay, what about these?
All right, so we have densely clustered mushrooms coming out of the base of the wood, the buttress roots, and I don't see any rings on them, so I'm going to call them ringless honey mushrooms, the Des Armillaria.
Yes, you are correct again. Okay, what about here?
Well, densely clustered, kind of yellowish. I guess I would say Armillaria, but I would have a hard time telling without flipping them over.
Yeah. So these.
I'm sorry. I would say Malea.
Yeah.
Without flipping them over.
Yeah. These turned out to be Tibessans, but your reasoning is eminently reasonable, and that's what we want. Okay. What about these?
So those are clustered. And I think I do see a ring on them, especially in the upper, the topmost mushroom. It looks like there's a ring hanging from them.
Yeah.
So being so clustered, I'm going to say Armillaria or Malea and not the Gallica.
Yep.
Gallica would be more spread out.
Absolutely. Very good. And there we're at the beginning of the talk there. Okay. So I guess there was one more thing I wanted to I've mentioned that my dad is watching, and so this is him, and some of you have met him just a few years ago when he look like this, but earlier this month when I was putting these talks together, I found a bunch of old pictures of us. And so here he is when he was a little bit younger than me, with our favorite northern tooth mushroom. And this used to come out reliably on this same tree, perhaps stimulated by all the poison ivy. And yeah, this would fruit for about 10 years until all of a sudden there was a storm and the tree just blew down and it was just like shards all over the floor because there was almost nothing left inside. And here he is with a parasol mushroom at the Comaphore, and at this point in time, this is how I looked. And as you can see, Luke, what kind of mushroom am I holding?
Now, it's kind of pixelated, but from the general shape and size of it, I would say it's a Berkelii.
Yeah, it's the Bondersevia berkelei that we discussed at the very beginning of the talk. And Dad keeps doing the mushrooming thing. Here he is with some oysters that a custodian found at one of the local parks, and my dad came by and he was like, this guy's like, hey, I found one of those mushrooms that you're always looking for. And it was this oyster mushroom, which made us both very happy. So I thought I would close with this and take questions. Do we have questions, comments, other fun?
So we did have a few questions that popped up in the chat. The beginning of the presentation, Jeannie Girth, she asked a question. Jeannie, would you like to unmute yourself and ask?
Sure. Yeah, I was just curious because I know the maitake has a lot of medicinal qualities, and I was wondering if the lookalikes have any of the medicinal quality of the maitake. I can't name the specific qualities, but
right. I have not heard of these other mushrooms being investigated or tapped for this. The hen of the woods, you may have heard the name maitake, which means dancing mushroom in Japanese. So it's actually a traditional edible in Japan and China and probably other parts of Eastern Asia. And they've been using it medicinally for quite a while. And that's where we get that medicinal idea from.
yeah.
And I don't know about the other two, but they are not used medicinally there, and that's pretty much how we've gotten our head start here on whether things are medicinal. So the other two are pretty much unknown and not investigated at this time.
Okay, thank you. And I did also harvest one of the others recently, and I thought it was a hen, but it was a month ago, and I cooked it forever, and it's really woody. So,
yeah, they're really tough.
yeah.
There was a question in chat, what are the other two lookalikes? And those other two the hen lookalikes are Bondersevia berkelei, which is the big tannish cream mushroom that young me was holding in that photo just a little while ago, and Miropolis with the blackening polypore. So yeah, we covered those right at the beginning. And
I think Anthony had a question next. Yeah. Anthony? I'll read it for you, Anthony. I can see your face. I forget what it was too, but type something in there. Find it.
Yeah, when I got disconnected, I lost that first half of the chat, so I can only see the previous half dozen.
I think my question was about whether or not the Armillaria genus is, if their annulus is typically considered a double annulus.
No. No. Double annulus, well, double annulus usually refers to a double layered annulus, which is this sort of thing here. So this Agaricus species, the partial veil has two layers. So you can see about halfway in, the bottom layer is peeling away from the top layer. So there's this inner layer, there's this inner area that's smooth near the stem where the lower layer of the veil is still there. But outside of that, there are just a few crumbs of it here and there. And you can see on the mushroom on the left here, that lower layer is starting to peel away from the upper layer of the partial veil. And that's usually what's meant by a double layer, by a double partial veil. It's a double layered partial veil. And Agaricus is the genus where it's most well known, but there are a couple of other ones. There's an Amanita or two where it really does have two rings. What is it? One of those southern guys. Amanita ravenelliae? No. Who else was down there? Kokery. Yeah, Amanita kokery. If we, I should have found a picture on the internet while I was still here. But yeah, not many people try to take a picture of it, but okay, here we go. Amanita kokery. You can see on the right here, there are two actual distinct rings on the stem. And, you know, here's the Wikipedia photo, and it, come on. It's got an upper and lower layer of stuff. Well, that isn't terribly good. But, whoops. Here we go. Let's see what my quo is showing. There. Well, you got the idea.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think Vicky Tartar had a question about.
Okay.
Vicky, do you want to ask that one?
Yeah, I'm unmuting. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So my question was, you showed, I think it was a maitake that was all white.
Mm-hmm.
And then you said that it was because it didn't get any sun.
Right.
I'm repeating it because I want to make sure I have it in my head. So, and it's correct. And you said that fungi and animals produce melanin in the sun, and plants don't do that. And then I'm wondering if you buy enoki in the store, in the supermarkets, all white, is that grown without sun?
Yes.
And then if you buy European asparagus, they're all white. I know they're plants. They're grown. Are they grown without sun? And is the plant's equivalent is no sun, no chlorophyll? Animal and fungi, no sun, no melanin. So that's the question.
All of that is correct. Yeah, they shovel dirt over the asparagus and it doesn't get any light, so it stays white and doesn't produce chlorophyll. Enokis are white because they're grown in darkness, like the white button mushrooms. They're sort of albino dwarf portobellos. You know, those are the same species, but the portobellos will produce their melanin, especially in sunlight. Like the shiitake, that brown color that they all have, that's melanin. As it is in humans, there is only one human skin pigment. And these are all mushrooms that turn brown in sunlight through that same pathway. And the mushrooms that are grown in darkness, like well, you can grow certain mushrooms in darkness, like enochis and Agaricus bisporus, and they'll end up, pigmentless. And you've probably found wild Flammulina, anywhere around the area, and when they grow in sunlight, they're actually very pretty and beautiful, and they have those lovely mahogany almost colors in the on the cap and on the upper stem. But yeah, they're the commercial enochis they're white because they're grown in darkness, and they have that long thin stem because they're grown in these long bottles. So a lot of the wood inhabiting fungi, they can detect whether, they have an animal like metabolism. So if they're grown if they come out in an enclosed space, they kind of use up the oxygen, and they can detect where the oxygen is, and they'll grow towards it. And basically, if you grow an enoki or an oyster or anything like that in a bottle, it thinks it's emerged in a hollow inside the tree, and it knows that it can't sporulate productively unless it gets outside into the open air, for the air to carry its spores away. So if you grow it in a low oxygen environment like a bottle, first of all, it grows towards the entrance, but it also keeps growing without forming the cap. And that's how you get those enokis that are these long, long, thin stems with just this little tiny cap at the end. It's because they're trying to get out of the bottle. And this also works with Ganoderma, the reishi, the lingchi, these varnished conchs. If you grow them in a low oxygen environment, they'll grow a big stem. If you have one of those varnished conchs growing up from underground wood, it'll form this big vertical stem, which they don't usually do when they're coming out of the side of a tree. But it'll form this big stem and grow out and then make its cap above ground once it's achieved liftoff, so to speak. But there's a technique of growing them in a chamber where there's just a little oxygen coming in, and they'll just keep growing stems and branch and fork, and it's called an antler formation for these. And they are traditionally very prized in China. They constitute some of the imperial regalia for that's the storehouse of the Chinese emperor. And now we know how to make that happen. But when they were only found naturally, it was this very rare and amazing thing that they paid a lot of attention to. So,
all right.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I think Andrea had a question. She wanted to ask about another type of edible.
Yeah, hi. I have a question about chicken of the woods. So I was taught that you just eat the outer kind of fleshy part, but I've also heard that people eat the whole mushroom. What do you recommend? And if you want to eat the tougher part of the mushroom, how do you recommend cooking it?
Okay. I am going to go back to Gary's site for you. And so we have two, especially right on the coast where you guys are compared to me, you have only two common species of chicken mushroom. So this is the flagship species, as known from Europe. It has a bright orange top and a yellow underside, which you're seeing here. And when it's still growing, the edge will also be this bright yellow color. And this species is sulfurous, and it is, a wonderful edible when it is when the edges are nice and thick like this, it is still growing and it'll be soft and, you know, wonderful to collect and eat. Also quite thick and soft. Okay, thick and soft, lovely stuff. We also have, I'm gonna have to sneak in here. Okay, this is Laetiporus cincinnatus. It is a different species. It lacks the yellow pigment. So it's white on the bottom and the top has this sort of salmon color because that brilliant orange that's on top of sulphureus, that isn't a single pigment. That's the salmon pigment plus the bright yellow pigment, which pervades the entire mushroom. And this one, you should pretty much just eat. Well, people do all sorts of things. I recommend just eating the edges where it's just really easy to run a knife through without almost any effort at all. When you get closer to the wood, it'll get tougher, and it has a very peculiar texture that's kind of like, it's sort of crumbly and tough at the same time. It's like, I don't know, a carpet or a corrugated cardboard, and it's really unpleasant for me. There are people who just chop these things up and say, yay, I'm eating it, it's wonderful. And I am not one of those people. And, you know, your mileage may vary, as they say. This one, cincinnatus, okay, so it doesn't come straight out from the tree. It usually comes up from the ground, from the roots of the tree that it's growing on. So it has this rosette formation. It doesn't form the shelves. And this is on the left here, on the right here. This is when these mushrooms get older, their fronds get thinner and they're not so good to eat. But if you've got a young cincinnatus like this, it's good to eat all the way through. And I have a friend that I've done a lot of mushrooming with, and he can't eat the sulphureus, but he can eat small portions of the cincinnatus without any problem. There are other species of Laetiporus. There are something like 13 in North America, and I think I accidentally found one that had not had a name at that point, and it was white poured, but it was coming out of the side of a tree, and it was this small thing, and it was already kind of hard, tough, crumbly, even though it was not very big. And I was like, this is weird, and I fried it up, and it was just awful. And I wrote to Tom Volk and I said, I found a chicken mushroom that looks like this, and it was just horrible. And he said, oh yeah, I think that's biological species number 9, and it looks like that, and it does taste absolutely horrible. So if you can occasionally find something that's different from these two, but it'll be a long time in between, and these two are pretty much what you look for. And I will in passing say that sometimes the chickens, you see it's kind of blobby when it's first coming out on the left over here. Sometimes they never make fronds, and they just form this big thick mass that is like the size of your head, but it's solid Laetiporus. And those are amazing, and you can eat the whole thing, and they've just been very good for me. So
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
All right. And then Shenglin, do you have a question? So I'll ask it for her. I don't know if she's still here or not. Shenglin Wan. She asked if anyone has had luck chucking hen leftovers onto oaks and getting them to root there.
I don't know of any. This is something that, you know, people do with a variety of mushrooms. I don't know of it, of people trying it with hen. It seems like a reasonable thing to do because, you know, it's another saprobe. So all it needs is proximity to the tree. But I have not done it myself. I don't know of it being done.
Okay. And then Jennifer Adler just asked a question. Sure.
Oh, hi. Nothing anymore. I think everything was answered. I did ask a little bit higher up whether or not there was any significant nutritional difference in enoki that were exposed to light and not exposed to light. But
the ones that have gotten light will have a lot more vitamin D in them.
And that goes for, I know that goes for quite a few species, but that's going to be the significant difference with the melanin in most light exposed mushrooms.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Great. All right. Do we have any other questions from anyone? That was the end of our questions. All right then. Well then, Leon, I would like to sincerely thank you on behalf of both the New Jersey and the New York clubs. Hope everyone very much enjoyed tonight. And give you a round of applause.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. I think our next lecture that we have planned is at the end of the month. Tentatively, we are going to have Tina Eller, who is the chief mycologist at Phillips Mushroom Farm, and she will be speaking on medicinal mushrooms. So that's a tentative date, but I believe that is going to be happening. So that will be October 30th at the end of the month. So until then, both clubs have our mushroom meetups, Monday nights for the New York club and Tuesday nights for the New Jersey club. So where we get together and identify mushrooms online. So with that, I'll say goodnight to everyone and thank you very much for attending, and I'll see you all soon.